It's the Beatles from the beginning to the end. It's their solo careers. It's their humor. It's their incredible music. It's the British invasion. It's their American adversaries. It's an historical musical education. It's the Beatles and a whole lot more. A Beatles fan's paradise. It's Beatles-A-Rama. Tune in. You'll love it. This is Pat Matthews Productions, and I want to welcome you to Beatles-A-Rama TV, your favorite interviews and video, all in one place, right here. Beatles-A-Rama TV. Beatles-A-Rama TV is on the air.
I'm James D. Jones of Beatles-A-Rama Radio and TV, and we have a very special guest with us today. I'm excited to get this conversation going because, at Beatles-A-Rama Radio and TV, we do a lot of music, okay? And we also, we talk about the authors that write about the Beatles and their music. But the Beatles' reach is so much more than just the music. And the author that I have with me today, Dan Absher, is one of those authors that has written a book about how the Beatles' reach, inspiration led him to write a book about something that a lot of folks don't even think about, but it's very, very interesting and curious. So tune in. You're going to love this interview.
Video, all in one place, right here. Beatles-A-Rama TV. Beatles-A-Rama TV is on the air.
So first and foremost, Dan, it's good to have you here. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. Thanks, James. Great to meet you and excited to be here.
I'll tell you what, you've been pretty busy promoting this book of yours. Why don't you tell everyone the name of your book and give them a little tease about what the book is about?
Okay, the book was just released February 3rd. It's called The Fab Four Pillars of Impact, Building Dynamic Teams the Beatles Way.
Yes.
And it blended my passion for the Beatles with my passion for leadership development and team building. I've been a Beatle fan since February 9th, 1964. And I was only 5 years old, but I was hooked from early on. And throughout my life and my career, the Beatles have been a big part of it. From when I coach, I use Beatle lessons. When I manage my business, I use Beatle lessons and teach a class in my company called Team Building with the Beatles, things like that. And that led me to write this book.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's funny because I always tell people in this business of ours, right? Nothing is Beatle proof. Even the business side of things, you can relate to what the Beatles did. I mean, they started their own record company. They started their own band. So let's get back. Your origin story, if you will, Dan. 5 years old, your journey with the Beatles began watching the Ed Sullivan Show. So with that being said, do you remember the moment when you realized that this was more than just music? That maybe it was something that you could shape how you see the world?
Yes. Well, not a specific moment. There are several moments. When you go through life's challenges, and celebrations, birthdays, weddings, anniversaries, memorial services.
Yeah.
My family and I, we've always used Beatles music as the background to those.
Yeah.
And similarly, in business and in coaching, I've done some coaching. I've used those Beatles influences, but a couple really important things stick out. One, when I read, there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers. It was a very popular book. One of his chapters, he talked about the Beatles and he he described the 10,000 hour principle, how to become proficient or become an expert at something, you need to put in 10,000 hours. And he used the Beatles and their experience in Liverpool and Hamburg as that experience, as that model. Then the other one, and this is even bigger, is hearing Steve Jobs on a 60-minute interview say his model for business is the Beatles. And it was partially aha, but partially it just confirmed what I believed. The Beatles' path to success is the same kind of path that a business, a team, organization, even families can learn from how they made it to the top.
It's kind of like a template.
Yes, a template, and we can learn also, and that's what's unique about the Beatles. We see their rise to the top, but we also see them fall apart.
Yeah.
And we can learn from that. What did they do wrong?
Yeah.
That caused them to fall apart. And we're still analyzing that. I just watched Man on the Run, Paul McCartney's new documentary, and they're still, dealing with how they broke up. Paul's even, trying to piece it all together, how it fell apart.
Well, and the fact that we're still talking about the Beatles and their solo efforts 60 years later.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of that going around with a lot of other bands. So this is interesting to say the least. And, you talked about how you use a lot of their music for events and different, occasions and stuff. And I think one of the key points about the Beatles music is the fact that it's very relatable.
Yes.
I mean, maybe not every song can be related to, but in general, they wrote about a lot of stuff that everyday people think about or go through or experience or dream about. And so I think that's one of their magical allures of people enjoying the music for so long. So,
for sure.
And saying that, many people love the Beatles, but few turn that passion into leadership philosophy. When did the light bulb go on where you said, there's a blueprint here for life and business?
Well, two answers. One, the light bulb was on a dimmer, and it slowly came on over years. But the light bulb for when I could make this a book occurred about 2 years ago. I had been doing presentations to business groups and local community groups about the Beatles. And when I do them to the business groups, I was refining it, and the message was well received. And it hit me that it's remarkable. All these lessons can be put together into a blueprint for building successful organizations. So it was a couple of years ago when I realized, hey, I could make a book out of this. Because I had done so many presentations, I had all these PowerPoint presentations. That gave me the foundation for the book, which helped a lot. And then after that, it was piecing them together. Honestly, when I started, I had 7 keys, and it just didn't seem right. I had to get it to 4, and I worked it out. So there are 4 pillars of wildly successful. That's what was really resonated when I narrowed it down to 4, and it really took off in my mind, and I could see the whole blueprint for the book. And it was about a year ago I was writing it. So I got through it.
It's come by pretty quick then, hasn't it?
Yeah. Like I said, I had that foundation of these presentations. I actually dictated those presentations.
Yeah.
And then, so got all that down. And then it was just editing, organizing. And it was actually really fun to write the book. It was a lot of work. There was a lot I didn't know about publishing a book.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot. But it direct writing, and it was from last January to beginning of May. So, but that was after I had done all the research. So it
Yeah.
was really, I formulated it, and I spent a lot of time. I'm fairly well retired from work. So
Right.
it was what I was doing last year at this time.
Oh, well, let me ask you this. If 5-year-old Dan Absher could sit down with you today, what would surprise him the most about where the Beatles moment eventually led?
That it's still the Beatles.
Yeah.
I believe the 5-year-old me would have expected that music was going to remain a big part of my life.
Yeah.
I think I'm as surprised as I'll bet the Beatles are that they've maintained this level of fame and impact for this long. So
They're still
that's
outselling a lot of the new artists.
yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now, Beatles lessons in leadership. The Beatles went from basically a scrappy Liverpool band to the most influential group in music history, with a leadership lesson from John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. Could people learn from?
Well, I'll go through the 4 pillars, which are the lessons. The first is right people in the right seats. I'll give an example from each of these pillars. When John and Paul met on July 6, 1957, Paul was really impressed with John, and they met backstage. Their mutual friend, Ivan Vaughn, introduced him, and John had Paul do a little audition, and he took John's right-handed guitar, flipped it over, played left-handed. Then he went to the piano, played a Little Richard tune, and imitating Little Richard's voice. And John was so impressed that he did not invite him to join the band. He thought he better think about this for a while because this guy might be more talented than he is. And so that is really the first lesson. So many leaders get intimidated by having greater talent around them. They want to be the smartest person in the room or the biggest expert in the room. And John had to think through that. And a few weeks or a few months later, depending on who you believe, John invited Paul into the band. So that set this precedent that we're getting the right people, the best people we can. We're getting them performing the best roles they can. Second one, I call a catalytic vision. From very early on, John drove the band to be the toppermost of the poppermost. Most Beatle fans have heard that saying, but that has a direct correlation over to business. That the stronger your vision, the more you'll motivate your people, and the stronger your vision, the clearer your vision, the more you'll motivate the right people to join you. So, which came first, the right people or the vision? I think in the Beatles' case, it was chicken or the egg. They both, without that big vision, I don't think Paul would have been as interested in teaming up with John, and then attracting George and ultimately Ringo. So first part's the people, second part's the vision. Third part, I call esprit de corps, and that is just the level of camaraderie they had, the sense of humor they had. People tend to forget this, but they were not an overnight sensation. They were together 5 years before they got their record contract and went through a lot of tough times, and they hung in there, and they needed to be able to get along and have fun along the way because some of those days were pretty bleak. And then when they did make it, they introduced a sense of humor. My favorite story there is when they got successful audition with EMI and Parlophone. George Martin's there. He records a few tunes with them in the studio, brings them all into the studio and says, okay, the control room, I'm going to play this back for you, plays it back for him. And then he says, so is there anything you don't like? And George Harrison says, yeah, I don't like your tie. And I mean, the fact that George's probably 18 or 19 at the time.
Yeah.
And George Martin, he was their gateway to fame, and they were cheeky enough, confident enough to use their sense of humor. And fortunately, the legend has it that the three others sort of held their breath until George Martin finally started laughing and thought it was hilarious. So, they throughout, they had a sense of humor, and in their song, they have lots of hidden humor that they had to get by the BBC and all that.
Yeah.
And then the final one I call the magical mystery. And that's something that also you see in a lot of teams and organizations, that the sum is greater, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And, as great as all four of them are individually, they just aren't, they're just better when they're the Beatles.
Yeah.
As great a songwriter as Paul is, as great a songwriter as John is, when they're playing off each other, it just was just that much better.
Like a synergy.
And that it got that synergy. I use that in the book. And part of that synergy occurred, especially in the songwriting between John and Paul, is they were kind of the yin and yang. Paul was always positive, confident, ready to roll. John was a little insecure, a little pessimistic, and that blending. I mean, what human can't relate to both sides of that coin, right? We all have moments where everything's going well and moments where we feel a little uncertain, and they bring that. And by the way, those are generalizations. It's not that the other couldn't write in the other way, but they had a tendency to do it that way. And then there's just this serendipity, and that's another part of this magical mystery. Just these crazy things happened. I already talked about when John and Paul met. Well, a few years later, Paul's writing Eleanor Rigby, and I'm sure most Beatle fans know this story too, but right in the same churchyard, in the graveyard by the church where John and Paul met, there's a tombstone with the name Eleanor Rigby on it. And Paul swears he just made that name up. It was fictitious. And then years later, he has said, well, maybe he saw it and subconsciously it planted in his brain, but there's just these odd coincidences like that.
The magical mystery.
Yes. And how that applies to organizations it's your frame of mind. It's your attitude. The Beatles were looking for serendipity. Like when John lays his guitar up against the amp and creates all this feedback, rather than panic and get mad at everybody, they say, oh, that's brilliant. That's going to be our opening to I Feel Fine. So when organizations or a band or a team, when they're in that mindset where they're looking at things positively, you find serendipity. And if you're being negative, you miss those opportunities for serendipity. And when they were rolling well, they were finding it everywhere. Everything, it was just, they saw as another opportunity.
Well, businesses, when we talk about the business world, right? Businesses often struggle with creativity, right? Versus structure. The Beatles, they seem to have thrived on both. And what can companies learn from how they balance experimentation and discipline?
That's a great question. I would say in the Beatles case, they had others around them that provided some structure. They probably weren't the best at structure, especially John.
Yeah.
John just was a ultra creative, and
Hmm.
constraints really weighed on him heavily. That's part of this. The message of this book is don't, use your left brain and your right brain. Don't,
Mm.
the best organizations leave room for both. If you're all structure and no creativity, you're not going to succeed. If you're all creativity without structure, you're going to have a lot of great ideas that go nowhere. So it's about blending those.
Yeah. Like a balance, if you will.
Absolutely.
Wow. Now, if the Beatles were launching their career today in the era of streaming and social media, let me ask you this. What leadership or branding moves do you think they would have made differently?
That is a difficult question because I'm not sure the Beatles could do it in the same way today because the industry is so much
It's a different
different,
world. It's a different
totally
world.
different world. Um, the garage bands, like, they were sort of the precursor to garage bands.
Right.
That just doesn't happen as much anymore.
No.
It's a lot more individual talent. It's
Hmm.
it I'm sort of diverting from the question, but one of the reasons the Beatles make such a great test case for organizations is that they were a group. And if you compare the other great musical artists in my lifetime, Elvis Presley,
Right.
Michael Jackson, Taylor Swift, there's no other group that is in that category. There were some Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, a
Yeah.
little bit, but not the same overall impact on the whole culture.
Right.
And so the Beatles are a great blueprint because they were about building a team to do it as opposed to an individual doing it. And that's a totally different thing in both positive and negative ways. So in today's environment, it would have been hard for them. Yeah, like you could never have this British invasion today because
No.
we hear about great artists really early on.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you
the
can,
whole world's connected now.
yeah. So the fact that the Beatles had all this pent up demand plus material that they already had in their catalog when they came to America had a big impact on how popular they became. I mean, you could say they were an overnight sensation in America. They certainly
Yeah.
weren't in England.
No.
But that couldn't, that really couldn't happen today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like my grandmother always used to say, the world gets smaller every day. And with all the social media and streaming and the way we connect, I think part of the mystery back then was, who are they? What is this new sound? And they just, they were quite popular in England and throughout parts of Europe years before they came to America and invaded the US, right? But what I always liked about the Beatles, and let's talk about this, Dan. Whenever a decision was to be made, all four of them had to agree or they nixed it. How does that apply for business today?
So that has been true since they broke up or since they sort of reunited
Right.
Apple. During I think John was more clearly the leader, especially
yeah.
early on. And Ringo, even though they split the band profits equally, I don't think Ringo could have vetoed. Well, they didn't veto, bringing on a new drummer to go to Australia.
Oh,
For
I
instance,
know,
even though
right?
George was against that.
Yeah.
So it's certainly been true since then.
Hmm.
How to applies to business is remember, organizations need to remember to get input and feedback from all of their people. I don't know that an organization could do what Apple does, and that's
Right.
you have 4 votes and everyone has a veto power. I think an organization could be more like how they were when they were active and on the rise, where John was a clear leader, Paul was the talent and the hardworking creative behind a lot of their work. And they all had specific roles was important.
Yeah.
So I think the veto doesn't really apply to business unless it's this exact situation. If say Microsoft could have had that, but Bill Gates decided he didn't want Paul Allen's voice anymore, right? So
Right.
they went through a different model. So I would say it worked in the Beatles case because that probably is the only way they resurrected Apple and have maintained the legacy of the Beatles all these years. Is by that egalitarian, everyone gets a vote, everyone can veto.
Now, the Beatles as like a business case study. When you look at the Beatles, Dan, not just as musicians, but as a startup team, what was their biggest competitive advantage?
Well, I go back to that vision. One thing I didn't talk about in the vision is their vision wasn't just to become toppermost of the poppermost. It was also to do it in a new way. They wanted to write their own music. They wanted to play their own instruments. They wanted to sing their own songs. And that was rare at the time. And that was revolutionary. So their biggest competitive advantage started when they realized they want to stay one step ahead of the competition. They used to, all the bands in Liverpool would play the A sides of American rock and roll or Motown, but they would go to the B sides. And then when other people would go to the B sides to copy them, that's when John and Paul realized, heck, the only way we're going to keep people from stealing from us is to write our own music. And they got serious about perfecting that craft. So I think what really stands out is that creative spark, their ability to write good music, and then their commitment. I mean, they absolutely wanted to be at the top. Not, it wasn't just a fly-by-night dream. They were committed to taking it all the way to the top.
Yeah, man, you're right on with that. You're spot on. And when I think about some of those things back in the day, I don't think the younger kids can appreciate it, but the music business was just that. It was a business. You had people who wrote, you had people who played, you had people who sing, you had people who did this. Everyone had a job. And all of a sudden you got these boys acting like they want to be Buddy Holly and no, we'll play our own instruments and no, we'll sing our own songs and no, we'll write our own songs. And we want to do it this way. It really upset the apple cart, if you will, that they did that. But that was one of their advantages, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. They wanted to do all of that. And in fact, when they replaced Pete Best with Ringo and they go back into Parlophone to record their first songs, George Martin brought in a studio drummer, and they rebelled. They allowed him to drum, but they also insisted on letting Ringo do it too, and they stayed together. So one, we want Ringo, and two, you're telling us you want us to record this song. No, we want to record songs we write. There's a great story about the song "How Do You Do."
Mm-hmm.
How do you do what you do to me?
Yeah.
George Martin wanted them to record and said, "This is going to be your first single," and they refused. And George Martin said, "Well, then write something better than this, and I'll let you do it." And they came back with "Please Please Me." So that competitiveness, that desire to do their own thing,
Yeah.
really set them apart from others who would have just been thrilled to a record contract. You just tell me what to sing, I'll sing it.
Yeah.
They wanted
When
to do
someone
it
promises you your first number one single,
Yeah.
I can't imagine someone going, "No, that's okay, thanks." But
Yeah.
the story behind that, I still remember John and Paul were saying, "We'd record this song, we would never be able to show our faces in Liverpool."
Yeah,
'Cause it
exactly.
wasn't their style. It was a different style. So they wrote their own style. They had their own style, and they really showed George Martin. Yeah, George had the last laugh because Jerry and the Pacemakers, that was their number one hit.
Yeah.
But also too, the Beatles were like, "But look what we've done. Look what we've done." And
Yeah.
they did it on their own terms, which is cool to take in account. Now, when we talk about bands, not even necessarily bands of the past, but just bands in general, bands they're basically businesses, small businesses, if you will, with huge personalities. How did the Beatles manage, or maybe even sometimes fail, to manage creative tension in a way that leaders can learn from?
Well, I would say through their rise to the top, they managed it well because everyone accepted their role,
Mm-hmm.
and that was key. What they failed to do, and if I use some management speak, they needed a strategic planning session, or they needed to go away on a retreat because the old roles weren't working anymore,
Yeah.
and they were just locked in. George Harrison was becoming a better songwriter.
Yeah.
George Harrison wanted to have a bigger part in things, and they failed to give room for people to grow and contribute differently. So that's a great lesson for organizations.
Yeah.
You need to give space for people to change roles. Just because on this date at this time we've got everyone's roles figured out, doesn't mean that'll be stagnant forever, because people
Right.
change, things change. So it's really important to give them that space. And then the other thing is, what happens when you achieve your vision? The vision was to be toppermost of the poppermost. They made it. So now what? So they look around the room, and they didn't go back together to say, "Okay, we've achieved that. What's our next vision?"
What's our next goal?
A successful organization would do that. They would get back together. Where are we going next? So when you leave it unsaid, that vacuum gets filled by individual visions, and that's what happened with the Beatles.
Yeah.
John really wanted to get into social justice and save the world. George wanted to just have inner peace and search for God. And Paul probably is closest to the original vision. He loved being a pop star, rock star.
Yeah.
He wanted to just keep it going, do more and better, and do more things. And Ringo, for a time wanted to be a movie star and was
Right.
distracted by that. So they all went different directions, and they didn't see that it was possible that they could have aligned around another vision that allowed them an opportunity to explore their own individual goals and still have group goals.
Yeah.
In their defense, there was no model on how to do that. They all thought that we're going to ride this as long as we can, and then we're done. They didn't think that there's a model for, like, we have models now. The Fleetwood Mac, the Eagles,
Yeah.
Van Halen. You have groups that reconfigure, or you just take a break for a while, do solo stuff, then you come back together. That didn't cross their mind, but that would have been possible. But they needed a
Well,
break, and so they weren't thinking creatively. How could we stay together?
yeah. Well, and with that being said, it it just seems to me that with all the expectations and everything, the Beatles were really another set of pioneers in uncharted waters. So they didn't really have a guide to go by. They were out there they were in the uncharted waters, finding and making that map for others to follow. So I could see that's probably another perspective of why they didn't have all the answers, because they didn't know what they knew what they were doing as far as music and writing and this and that, but uncharted waters, they were just being themselves.
Yeah. And can't underestimate the impact Brian Epstein had on the whole equation.
Yeah.
Both their rights, they were able to, Brian, all the business stuff, Brian, you take care of,
Mhm.
to the extent that it really was a fault of all four of them. They should have at least been aware enough of the
Yeah.
business side of it to have a working knowledge, and they just completely deferred to Brian for that. And so when Brian died,
Yeah.
it had a lot bigger impact on them than it needed to have. And in fact, it's so interesting. Even in anthology, you hear them talk differently. Ringo saying
Yeah.
we're like chickens without heads, and
Yeah.
John says we knew we had it, and then Paul
Mhm.
said, well, we were kind of managing ourselves anyway, so we thought we would just carry on. I mean,
Yeah.
their whole perspective was just different.
Oh, yeah.
And they, so they were not communicating well, and they weren't on the same page. Can't get on the same page if you're not
No.
communicating.
And if you put all your eggs in one basket, like they did with Brian, and then Brian passes away, now what do we do? He was the business manager. We
Yeah.
just did this. So now when we talk about Lennon and McCartney, um, that partnership is legendary. It just is. Whenever you hear Lennon and McCartney, you instantly know who's who and what's what. But with that being said, what can entrepreneurs learn from that kind of collaboration about having a legendary partnership?
John and Paul were very entrepreneurial, so there is a lot you can learn from them.
Mm-hmm.
Just setting ego aside, they early on they agreed songwriting credit goes to Lennon McCartney. They weren't going to worry about who wrote how much. And early on in their career, that was really to Paul's benefit. In other words, John wrote more songs early, and
Oh, yeah.
toward the end, Paul wrote more songs, particularly hits.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they really weren't, between the two of them, they weren't that worried about who got credit between the two of them. And that was really important. I think that it started early when Stu Sutcliffe left the band and they needed a bass player.
Yeah.
And George and John immediately said, not me, not me. And Paul just looked around the room and said, okay, I'll do it. And he did it and became one of the greatest bass players ever. So
Yes, indeed.
that showed, he's willing to set the ego aside for the what's good for the group. And so when they were in that mode, and entrepreneurs got to be that way. When you're just starting up and you're entrepreneurial, you don't have a whole staff to do everything for you. You got to be flexible. You got to do what's got to be done. And they were doing that.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about business, let's talk about Dan Absher. Your personal reflection, if you will, Dan. After 32 years of leading a construction company, how have the Beatles principles actually helped you in the real world when the stakes were high?
The the way they've most helped is the team building aspect. They're setting ego aside, not worrying about who gets the credit. That's we've tried to make that a foundation of our company.
Yeah.
All for one for all. Sense of humor. We try to introduce fun into the business. Couple stories I tell in the book. At our annual meeting, we have a giant rock paper scissors match, me against the whole company, and we get down to about 8, and then they can come up on stage, the final 8. And so I would winnow it out by doing rock paper scissors and honor system. If I beat you, you had to sit down, and the winner wins a couple $1,000s at the end of the day. It's for fun.
Yeah.
And so that's fun. And then we did a thing that we're still doing called Good News Friday. We decided, we're tired of leaving for the weekend with bad news. So from now on, no more bad news on Friday. It's only good news. And similar to that serendipity, when you're looking for good news, you can find it. So we would try to have an announcement every Friday. We just landed a new job, or so-and-so got promoted, or this happened, or we finished this big project. So we would try to share good news so you can go away for the weekend on a high.
Have a feel-good factor going on.
Yeah.
Now, was there ever a moment in business, Dan, where a Beatles lyric or a story or a lesson genuinely changed the decision you were about to make?
When I've had to build the executive management team 3 times in my career. And so every time I do that, I've looked back at the way John built his team. So it didn't change, but it's guided. So since they've always been a part of me, there wasn't this aha, where, oh, that's right, I should do it like the Beatles. It's always been the way I've looked at things.
Part of your being.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this, Dan. There's 1,000 books out there, probably many more than that, about the Beatles.
Yeah.
And but very few of them use them as a leadership blueprint. With that being said, Dan, what was the exact moment when you realized their story could potentially teach people how to build stronger teams?
Don't know the exact moment, but it evolved. I've been teaching this team building with the Beatles class for over a decade.
Oh, wow.
I think I'll give you a different aha moment or exact moment is when I realized their breakup was just as valuable as their rise to the top, because I was wondering how I'm going to play this. They built a successful organization, but they fell apart. And then I had an aha that, I'll use that as lessons on what to avoid. I called it derailment. How do you avoid derailment? You create space for your organization's George Harrison to become, to blossom as a songwriter. You have a strategic planning session where you recalibrate your vision. You analyze whether you've achieved what you've set out to accomplish, and then re-up it. So I look at the mistakes they made as at least as valuable, probably more valuable for organizations, because it shows you exactly what not to do. I have an exercise that I actually do in my classes, in my workshops, that's in the book called Find Your Inner Beatle. And I describe the personalities of the guys, and it's perfect for identifying those in an organization who feel like they're underappreciated, because that's a warning sign. If someone feels
Mm.
underappreciated, and they went too long underappreciating George,
Oh, I know.
and it just blew up. And it makes me sad to think, what if John and Paul had looked at it differently as, wow, what if I went and collaborated with George instead of John next
Yeah.
week? Because John's off with Yoko. What if I
Right.
called George up and said, hey, what are you working on? Here's what I'm working on. There were so many possibilities that they just didn't see because they were
Yeah.
locked into those original roles. So it's important to an organization not to lock people into a role so firmly that you don't see what else is possible.
And I mean, basically, avoid pigeonholing
Yeah,
individuals and the group.
exactly.
Yeah. Now, your book, it blends business leadership with Beatles history. Now, did the concept for the Fab Four pillars of impact come to you gradually over time, or was there a one aha moment where everything just clicked?
It was gradually over time. And I started with, okay, what were the keys to their success that applied to business? And I had 7 of them. And some of them were a little weaker than others.
Hmm.
So I felt like I was forcing them to come up with 7 anyway. And the aha moment was actually after I'd already uh, recorded and dictated all of my presentations.
Yeah.
I started thinking through it, and I said, a couple of these out of the 7 aren't real strong
Hmm.
anyway.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if there were 4? And
Mm.
so I did have an aha that, of course, there should be a Fab 4 pillars, not
Yeah.
7, 5, 6, or 5. Um, so I used a little artistic license. The magical mystery is
Yeah.
really 2 blended together, synergy and serendipity, but they
Yeah.
both are part of that magic. So I think it fits.
Yeah.
So that was when I was actually writing. I had to rewrite a little bit
Oh,
to get it back to 4 and
yeah.
build this new concept. But once I landed on that, everything just flowed after that.
Well, and Dan, when people talk about the Beatles, we instantly think of the music. Their music impacted. I mean, we're still talking about it 60 years later, right? But I wonder if when people first hear leadership lessons from the Beatles, I mean, some might smile and maybe some might be skeptical. But what do you say to someone who thinks rock bands or corporate leaderships have nothing in common?
Surprisingly, I haven't run into that much.
Mm,
People are intrigued almost immediately.
okay.
Perhaps those who aren't intrigued just tune me out. I'm not talking with them, but most people are. Here are a couple of things I've found. People who are executives, CEOs types, high achievers,
Hmm.
most of them love music.
Yeah.
And it's something I didn't anticipate.
Oh,
And so they just clue into it immediately. So and music it's a universal language. It makes difficult conversations safer. When I'm quoting a
hmm,
John Lennon lyric, that's better
right.
than lecturing someone, right? Uh,
Yep.
People hear that more easily. So I really haven't seen that. One of the obstacles I'm learning as I've been speaking lately to different groups, I'm having a hard time gauging the level of Beatle expertise in a room, and I have to
Oh.
remember sometimes I have to start at square one, and
Hmm.
I'm jumping up to square 50. Um, the last presentation I did, at the end of it, I felt like, wow, I should have started a lot. By the end, I'm getting questions and they were catching on more, but I needed to sell believe it or not, I needed to sell how successful the Beatles were in the 60s. That people don't, I mean, everyone's heard of the Beatles, but
Yeah.
they don't realize they weren't just successful, they just dominated and they
Yeah.
revolutionized. 13 out of the 13 best-selling albums of the 60s in the UK, 10 of them were Beatle albums. And the other 3 were Broadway shows, not other rock bands. That's how much they revolutionized pop music
Yeah.
and rock music.
Well, Dan, if you think about it, seriously, music lovers, business people, whoever, about the Beatles, you can love them, hate them, loathe them, whatever. But the reality of the matter is, the Beatles, in my personal opinion, changed the way we listen to music.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. Now, the Beatles are often remembered as musical geniuses, but they were also incredibly disciplined workers, especially in the early years. Do you think modern teams underestimate the role of hard work behind the creative process and successes, I guess?
Yeah. I I, I haven't really. I think most organizations understand it takes a lot of hard work.
Hmm.
I I I think the yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of hard work for the creative process. A lot of people who are not creatives take for granted, oh, they just came up with the idea, I'm doing all the work. Well, no, those ideas, that creativity, it takes a lot of hard work. And so I think sometimes there's a lack of respect between the ones, doing the daily work and the ones coming up with the ideas.
Yeah.
So, when those are blended and they're respecting each other, that's important for an organization.
Yeah.
I laugh at, John, Ringo. I've heard George say this. They talk about how, quote, lazy they were, and they would hide from Paul because Paul would always want to be working. And so that's created this myth that Paul was the only hard worker in the Beatles.
Yeah.
That was probably true in the late 60s when the other
Right.
guys were burnt out, but no, they all worked tirelessly,
Oh, yeah.
nonstop from the late 50s till at least the mid 60s, maybe 66, 67,
Mhm.
68, in that area where they finally started taking breaks.
Yeah. Well, and Dan, when you think about the Beatles, you just can't have one picture of the Beatles represent them because they were such a band that grew in front of our eyes. There was an evolution from, well, let's just, they were constantly reinventing themselves from the mop top pop to the groundbreaking experimentation of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So with that being said, Dan, what lesson does evolution hold for businesses trying to stay relevant?
It's very good. Good point. The Beatles were able to evolve musically much better than they were able to evolve as a business. If they'd applied those same lessons to their business as they did to their music, they could have evolved their business model and succeeded more. Not that they're doing fine financially, but
Oh, yeah.
they did throw a lot of money away in the 60s. But so they were constantly, stretching the, stretching the envelope, trying to,
Yeah. Really.
didn't want to remain stagnant. And that's, tribute to all of them get credit for that. George took them places. John was always going places, and Paul, of course, had all these musical influences in his life that
Oh, yeah.
changed. So it created this wonderful tapestry of different musical styles and really stretching the envelope.
Now, Dan, right now, why don't you go ahead and grab your book, show it in front of the camera, and where can people get this book?
Two best places to get it are bookshop.org or amazon.com. It's fortunately been fairly successful so far. It's hit the Amazon bestseller list in
Congratulations.
categories, and it was on the list of new releases, the top new release in the Beatles category, and so it's been fun to see that happen. It's also, I encourage people to come to my website, fab4academy.com. Not only can you get the book there, but I encourage people to join our community. Every day I release a new song. I have a monthly theme. Every day we analyze one Beatles song or solo song by a Beatle. And I'm doing that for the full year. And in the course of a year, we will do the entire Beatles catalog.
Oh, wow.
I started last June 1st, so I'm actually almost done.
Wow.
But yeah, when I connected with the publisher, they said, well, you got to up your game on social media and all this stuff. That's the key to the success of any book. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, this would be fun. I'll do a daily release. So this week, every monthly, there's a theme. This week's theme is mental health, which is a tough theme. Like yesterday's song was "Your Blues," the Beatles song John wrote. It's a dark theme. So trying to find a way to spin those to a positive way has been a challenge, but I think I did it. About, hey, if you're feeling dark, you need to be able to share it. And by John sharing it in a song, people who are feeling in a dark place have something to relate to. And that's about an important part of your mental health is be willing to express it either verbally or in song. So I've been having fun with that. It will be, once I finish the year, it'll be the next book. They're called Daily Words of Wisdom, and I'll have a book. It's more of a coffee table type book where every day there'll be a thought for the day about the Beatles.
I like that.
Yeah, so it's the origin, a brief origin of the song, and then the message of the song. I gotta say, last month was about romantic love and all the love songs. That was a little more fun than trying to spin their mental health related song.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And once again, so folks can check out your website. What is the website again?
fab4academy.com.
Folks, and if you go there, Dan encourages you to join and follow, and he has all these great little things that he releases. The reason why I wanted you to show the book and talk about this is music meets leadership. And I love that each chapter of your book includes a curated playlist. And was there a particular Beatles song that perfectly captured one of your favorite leadership pillars?
Oh, I'll say no, but I'm going to give you a song that encapsulates what I hope the book message is. All You Need Is Love. The story behind All You Need Is Love is incredible. The message I hope that people get from the book, that I think was the overriding message of the Beatles, is that centering yourself, your organization on love and peace is good. You don't have to be a jerk to be successful in business. You don't have to, you can reach out to people and have a message of love. And in the song, All You Need Is Love, it's remarkable for a few reasons. One, they had just finished Sgt. Pepper's, which, took a lot of creative energy. And then Brian signs them up for the One World broadcast, which is going to be the first worldwide satellite broadcast that will be seen by, estimates vary, but between 400 million and 700 million people. And England asked the Beatles to do a song. Most of the other countries are doing,
performances and
dances. Performances, ballet, opera.
Yeah.
The Britain does rock music. So they have to write a song. And John comes up with All You Need Is Love. Fascinating, because it's another pivot point about the Beatles is their internal competition between John and Paul, who got these songs. Every time there was a competition to come up with songs, they always came up with a masterpiece, one or the other. It is amazing. So they came up with this song, and the message they want to send around the world is all you need is love. All you need is love is also a misunderstood lyric. A lot of people think it's just about easy fix, all you need is love, everything's better. That's not the message of the song. The message of the song is just the opposite. You may not fix everything, but in time, you can learn how to be you in time. There's a lyric in there where John says, all you need is love. Nothing you can do that can't be done. You can learn how to be you in time. All you need is love. So the message is, you may not solve everything else, but you can learn how to be yourself. You can become comfortable with yourself if you have love in time. It's not an overnight thing. It's dedicating your lifetime to that for you to become mentally for your mental health, your confidence, everything. And then
it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I like that. Well, when readers finish the Fab Four Pillars of Impact, what is the one realization you hope they walk away with?
Well, it's a good question. I kind of did that, but I'll close with this. Together, teams can create a level of excellence that is beyond the grasp of any individual. More importantly, the Beatles showed us how to do it with a universal message of peace and love. Their legacy invites us to do the same. And in the end, that's what truly matters. Those are the last lines of the book.
I love it. Man, that is strong, Dan. I love that. Well, I'm going to tell you what, this has been a fascinating conversation. It's always incredible to hear how the story of the Beatles continues to inspire people beyond the world of music. And this book here is really a refreshing, different take of the Beatles and how they did it. Because everyone, older folks, kind of know the story of the Beatles, and it's hard for us to separate myth from fact, but everyone has a working knowledge of the Beatles. But with your book, not only do you apply what they've done and how they did it, but you apply it in a way that's positive for people to have that ongoing process. Like, you're not going to get this done like that. Right. It's a process.
Yeah.
And this book shows the Beatles and that evolution of the ongoing process. So this is really a refreshing, great way to look at the Beatles from a different angle, and you did it, and you did it really good. So
thank you.
I can't really tell folks enough to go check this book out. And once again, where can they get this book?
Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
And they can also get it from your website as well?
Yeah.
And what's that website?
fab4academy.com.
Okay. Well, Dan, I want to thank you for your time and explaining this wonderful book of yours, and for joining us, for sharing powerful ideas behind your book the Fab Four Pillars of Impact, showing us that creativity, collaboration, and vision that propel four young musicians from Liverpool onto the world stage. And with that, Dan, I can't say thank you enough. And I look forward to your next book. And if I can ever be of service to you, by all means, please reach out. When we were talking about getting together to do this interview, we were talking about our grandkids. And it was funny because you and I have a lot of common ground, even with the one child with the same middle name. So it's cool when you can talk to people and relate and really break that barrier of business, if you will, and go, hey, I'm human, you're human.
Yep.
I like what you've done. Let's talk about it. And here we are. And your book is doing really good. It's just recently released, February, correct?
Yeah.
And it's having quite an impact. So you must be doing something right, Dan. So keep up the great work. Congratulations on your book. And folks, if you want to learn more about Dan, I would really suggest you go to his website, thefab4academy.com. There you can really get into the workings of what he's doing and the message he's getting out. And Dan, once again, I can't say thanks enough for your time. And if I can ever be of service to you, please sound off. We're always happy to help out our friends here at Beatle-A-Rama Radio and TV. I am James D. Jones, your favorite magical mystery tour guide of the Beatle years and beyond, if you will. And it's people like you, Dan, that really, I guess the best way to put it is there's so many books out there that say the same thing over and over, but they just change the order that it's said. With your book, it's a new perspective, and it's something that you could apply to your everyday life and business. I like that.
Right
so
on.
Thank you, man.
Dan,
Well,
it's
I'll tell
great
you,
to talk to you.
always. And Dan, with that, we are done. I'll have Warren edit this so it's nice and tight and make you look like $1 million. And I want to thank you for believing in Beatles-A-Rama Radio and TV. Great guys. They're great guys. I love Pat. I love Warren. They love me. Scotty O'Rourke does a great job. Everyone that is working for this Beatles-A-Rama, it's kind of like what you said with business. It's a collaboration. It's creativity. It's not pigeonholing anyone into one certain place. And I think that's what makes, what's the old phrase? That's what makes the dream work is teamwork.
Yeah, right on.
So, well, hey, you take care, and I will
Okay.
catch up with you soon enough. All right.
All right. Peace and love, man. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.
What if the secret formula for organizational excellence has been hiding in plain sight for over 60 years? It's right in the incredible story of the most successful musical group of all time. Dan Absher, longtime CEO, coach, and educator, presents the Beatles as the ultimate case study for building exceptional teams, from their meteoric rise to their breakup. Absher uncovers 4 transformative pillars of enduring excellence: right people, right seats, catalytic vision, esprit de corps, and the magical mystery of synergy and serendipity. Packed with Beatles trivia, curated playlists, actionable tools, and practical insights, this is more than a business book. It's a unique blend of music history and organizational wisdom, a blueprint for any team or organization to become wildly successful and avoid derailment. The Fab Four Pillars of Impact, as revealed by Dan Absher, coming soon.